Los Santos, the city of dreams, a sprawling metropolis baked under the relentless San Andreas sun. Skyscrapers pierced the hazy blue sky, their glass and steel facades reflecting the endless ocean. Down below, the streets hummed with a rhythm all their own. The city was a tapestry of contrasts. In the opulent hills, mansions sat behind high gates. In neighborhoods like Strawberry and Davis, the sounds of life were louder, the colors more vibrant. People from all walks of life crossed paths here. At Vespucci Beach, the boardwalk was a carnival of activity. The waves crashed gently against the shore. From the docks at the port of Los Santos to the dusty trails of the Gran Senora Desert, the region was alive. This was the greater Los Santos area, basking in what seemed like an eternal summer. And no one suspected that the city of dreams was on the verge of a nightmare. May 24, 2024 began like any other day in Los Santos. The sun rose, casting a golden glow across the city as early morning commuters hit the freeways. The city was waking up, preparing for another day. At the Mission Row precinct, Officer Frank Miller started his shift. Across town, paramedic Sarah Jenkins restocked her ambulance at Pillbox Hill Medical Center. In La Mesa, Ace tuned a sports car, ready for a transport gig. None of them knew their plans were about to be washed away by an unimaginable force. Miles out over the Pacific Ocean, a monster was brewing, a freak system that had defied all prediction models. It grew in size and strength, a swirling vortex of wind and water, hidden from view by the vastness of the sea. It was a silent, unseen threat, gathering power far from the shores of San Andreas. On land, the sky was clear, and the city remained blissfully unaware of the danger approaching. The National Weather Service office in Los Santos was a quiet hub. Meteorologist Dr. Eris Thorne noticed a small cluster of clouds organizing faster than expected. The first to feel the change were the fishermen. One old fisherman looked at the darkening horizon and felt a deep unease. Something was wrong. He turned his boat and began the journey back to the harbor. The threat was invisible, a silent predator stalking its prey. The city of Los Santos was completely vulnerable, and it didn't even know it. As the afternoon wore on, the wind began to gust, rattling street signs. People struggled against the wind. The whispers of the approaching storm were starting to become audible. The tide seemed unnaturally high. A dark line was visible on the western horizon. On the police radio, Officer Miller heard the first weather-related calls. A downed power line. He felt a knot of concern tighten in his stomach. The system had exploded. What was a minor blip just hours ago was now a massive, swirling storm front bearing down on the city. He scrambled to issue a flash flood warning. Los Santos was directly in its path, completely unprepared for the deluge that was about to be unleashed. The change was brutally fast. One moment, the sky was a hazy, clouded gray. The next, it was a bruised, angry purple. The sun vanished completely, plunged into an unnatural twilight. It was only mid-afternoon, but the world was cast in a dark, ominous gloom. Streetlights, triggered by the sudden darkness, flickered on across the city. Their pale orange glow seemed weak and fragile against the suffocating sky. The wind, no longer gusting, now howled with a steady, mournful cry. It tore at awnings and sent garbage cans skittering across the pavement. The city, which had been merely unsettled, was now officially on edge. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. In his patrol car, Officer Frank Miller felt the change in pressure. It was a physical sensation, a weight in the air that made his ears pop. He looked out his window at the sky. It was the color of a fresh bruise, a swirling mass of dark, turbulent clouds. He had lived in Los Santos his whole life. He had seen storms before, but he had never seen anything like this. The radio in his car crackled with a new urgency. The dispatcher's voice was strained, trying to keep up with the flood of incoming calls. Reports of localized flooding were starting to trickle in from the coastal areas. The whispers had become a shout. At Pillbox Hill Medical Center, Sarah Jenkins stood with her partner by the ambulance bay doors. They watched the sky boil. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying a strange, metallic scent. It was the smell of rain, but amplified, heavy and thick. The hospital's generators kicked in with a low rumble, a precaution against the inevitable power outages. They knew what a sky like this meant. It meant their shift was about to become very busy. It meant injuries, accidents, and chaos. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, a small, futile gesture against the immense power gathering above them. The calm was over. The storm had arrived. Far out in the Gran Senora Desert, the change was just as dramatic. The vast open sky, usually a brilliant blue, was now a solid wall of churning black clouds. Dust devils danced across the arid landscape, whipped into a frenzy by the powerful winds. The few residents of Sandy Shores looked up from their trailers and workshops, their faces etched with a mixture of awe and fear. They were used to the extremes of the desert, the blistering heat and the cold nights. But this was different. This was a force of nature that felt alien and hostile. The storm was not just over the city, it was consuming the entire region. Then came the rain, a downpour, not a drizzle. Huge, cold drops hammered the city, instantly overwhelming drains and flooding streets. Water surged over curbs, turning roads into rivers and sidewalks into streams. Ace watched from his garage as his escape vanished beneath the flood, powerless in the darkness. Sarah Jenkins fought to reach a pileup. Her ambulance nearly swept away, the city gridlocked and drowning. The storm wasn't just a disaster, it was a blockade, trapping everyone in its path. Dr. Eris Thorne's warnings came too late. The storm had stalled, dumping record rain on Los Santos. Emergency alerts blared, but most people were already trapped by rising water. Office workers and families watched helplessly as floodwaters invaded. Officer Miller's patrol car struggled through submerged streets. Every route was a dead end. The city's basin geography funneled runoff into downtown, compounding the disaster. Rain from above, floods from the hills. Los Santos was squeezed from all sides. The warnings were a grim confirmation, not a solution. Panic erupted as drivers abandoned cars, wading into dangerous currents. Manhole covers popped, hidden whirlpools formed, and people struggled to stay upright. Freeways became parking lots. Some climbed onto car roofs, others smashed windows to escape. In darkened stores, looting began, but most huddled together, desperate for safety. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Every call was urgent, most went unanswered. Paramedics and police were isolated, forced to help whoever was right in front of them. The city's order had collapsed into chaos. As water rose, a strange hush fell. Streets became canals, cars floated, and the city's noise faded to rain. From high-rises, people watched in stunned silence, trapped but safe for now. Officer Miller, stranded atop his car, realized his authority meant nothing against the flood. Ace stood in his ruined garage, ambitions washed away, the flood an equalizer. The city's rules were gone, only survival mattered. Los Santos held its breath, bracing for what came next. The flood became a raging current, sweeping debris and vehicles through the city's streets. Lampposts and traffic lights stood as lonely markers in the brown sea. Officer Miller, perched on his car, knew he had to move or be swept away. Sarah Jenkins and her partner abandoned their ambulance, fighting the torrent toward higher ground. Ace's garage filled to his waist. His prized car lost, he faced a desperate choice: stay or brave the flood outside. The city was no longer concrete, but a dangerous, unpredictable sea. Every step was a fight for survival. The mission for all: escape the water at any cost. The flood redrew Los Santos. Landmarks vanished, neighborhoods drowned, the city's colors replaced by muddy brown. The water hid deadly hazards: open manholes, submerged debris, invisible traps. Power failed, plunging districts into darkness, lit only by lightning and sporadic fires. The city's layout became a maze. Street signs and familiar buildings disappeared beneath the flood. People were lost in their own neighborhoods, unable to recognize home. Officer Miller clung to a traffic pole, disoriented and alone in the city he once knew. Los Santos was unrecognizable, a city erased by water. The roar of the rain was constant, a deafening white noise that just smothered everything. But beneath it, new sounds began to emerge. These were the sounds of the city dying. There was the groan of stressed metal as bridges and overpasses strained against the current. The sharp crack of shattering glass as windows gave way to the water pressure. The sickening crunch of floating cars colliding with buildings. And beneath it all, the deep, guttural gurgle of a million drains and pipes surrendering to the flood. It was a symphony of destruction, a soundtrack for the end of a world. From the relative safety of the overpass, Sarah Jenkins could hear the human sounds. Faint cries for help were carried on the wind, their sources impossible to locate. The panicked shouting of people trapped on rooftops, the splash of someone falling into the water. These sounds were honestly more terrifying than the storm itself. They were the sounds of individual tragedies, of lives in peril. She clutched her medical bag, her knuckles white. She was a paramedic. Her entire purpose was to respond to those cries. But here, she was just another potential victim, unable to help, forced to listen to the city drown. The flood had a voice. It was a low, constant rumble, the sound of millions of gallons of water moving through a space not meant to hold it. It was the sound of immense weight and power. In his garage, Ace heard this rumble get louder. He heard the building's foundation creak. The main door finally gave way with a deafening screech of tearing metal. Water exploded into the garage, a violent wave that threw him against the back wall. He gasped for air, sputtering, the foul taste of the flood in his mouth. The world became a chaotic mess of noise and water, a violent churning confusion that threatened to pull him under for good. For those trapped inside buildings, the sounds were different, more intimate and terrifying. It was the sound of water seeping under the door, a quiet hissing that promised a slow invasion. It was the pop and fizz of electrical outlets shorting out as the water level rose inside the walls. It was the gentle, rhythmic bump of furniture floating and colliding in the dark. For a family huddled on the second floor of their home, these sounds were a countdown. Each new noise signaled that the water was closer, that their refuge was shrinking. The city was drowning and they were trapped inside it, listening to its final, gurgling breaths. In the few places that still had power and communication, a desperate effort to organize a response was underway. At the Emergency Operations Center, located in a secure building downtown, officials stared at screens that showed a city in chaos. The 911 system was a blinking wall of red lights. The city's camera network showed only brown water or static. Reports from first responders on the ground were sporadic and horrifying. The scale of the event was, honestly, beyond any contingency plan. They had plans for earthquakes, for riots, for fires. They had no plan for this. The city's leadership was flying blind. The call went out to every available emergency worker. Police, fire, paramedics, all were recalled to duty. But getting to their stations was nearly impossible. Many were trapped in their own homes by the flood. Those who could make it found their stations were also flooding. Fire engines were submerged in their bays. Patrol cars were floating in their parking lots. The equipment needed for a large-scale rescue was either underwater or inaccessible. The responders were willing, but they were crippled. They were an army without weapons, ready to fight a battle they had no means of winning. The first crucial decision was made: abandon land vehicles. The only way to move through the city now was by water. The call went out for boats, any boats. LSPD and LSFD naval units were mobilized from the port of Los Santos, but they were designed for the open ocean, not for navigating debris-filled, shallow urban canyons. Officials also put out a desperate plea for civilian assistance. Anyone with a boat, a fishing boat, a speedboat, even a dinghy, was asked to help. It was a chaotic, last-ditch effort to create a makeshift rescue fleet from scratch. The city needed a navy, and it needed it now. The problem of communication was immense. The radio systems were failing. Cell towers were losing power. Different agencies struggled to talk to each other. A police officer on a rooftop had no way to talk to a fire crew trying to launch a boat a few miles away. The command structure that holds a city's emergency response together was collapsing. Orders were given that couldn't be followed. Cries for help were broadcast that no one could receive. The responders were becoming isolated islands in the flood, forced to make life or death decisions on their own, with no support and no guidance from above. At the top, leaders were paralyzed by a lack of information. They could see the magnitude, but couldn't direct the response. Trapped by the scale, forced to make impossible choices. On the ground, individual responders became their own commanders. Officer Miller was now the de facto leader of survivors gathered on a rooftop. Sarah Jenkins and her partner on a freeway overpass faced a similar situation. They were the only medical professionals among stranded motorists, setting up a makeshift triage. This isolation created a new pressure. For Ace, on his garage roof, the isolation was total. He was just one person, a tiny speck in an immense disaster. As the rain finally began to lessen, the true nature of the new Los Santos was revealed. It was, honestly, a city of islands. The tops of skyscrapers in downtown, the wealthy mansions perched in the Vinewood Hills, the high ground of the Del Perro freeway overpass. These were the only patches of dry land left in a vast urban archipelago. The spaces between these islands were treacherous waterways, filled with hidden dangers and strong currents. Travel between them was impossible without a boat. The city's geography had been fundamentally and violently rewritten. Life was now defined by who was on an island and who was in the water. The psychology of the survivors began to shift. The initial panic and terror gave way to a grim, weary determination. On the rooftops and overpasses, small communities formed. Strangers shared what little food and water they had. They offered words of comfort. They worked together to create shelters from the wind and rain. A new temporary society was being born out of the wreckage. The old divisions of the city, wealth, neighborhood, occupation, mattered less now. The only thing that mattered was survival, and the dawning realization that they would have to rely on each other to achieve it. The ecosystem of the city changed. The floodwaters were not just water, they were a thick, toxic soup. Gasoline and oil from millions of submerged cars mixed with raw sewage from overwhelmed treatment plants. Chemicals from industrial areas leached into the flow. The water itself was a biohazard, and life began to adapt. Rats displaced from the sewers swam through the streets. Coyotes and other wildlife from the hills were spotted on rooftops, having fled the rising water. It was a bizarre and unsettling new environment, a perversion of nature taking over the ultimate symbol of human civilization. As Act 2 of this long day drew to a close, the situation was bleak, but not entirely without hope. The rain had eased, offering a small reprieve. The scramble to organize was beginning to yield results, with the first rescue boats being deployed from the port. On the islands of survivors, a sense of community was taking hold. The city of Los Santos was broken, submerged, and poisoned, but its people were still alive. They had survived the initial onslaught. Now they faced a new challenge, enduring the long night on their new watery landscape, and waiting for a rescue that was still hours or even days away. The liquor store rooftop was a fragile sanctuary for Officer Frank Miller and a handful of survivors. The wind and cold relentlessly battered them. Below, the churning water was a constant reminder of their precarious position. Miller organized a watch system offering reassurance. He was the anchor for this terrified group. They were a random collection of souls, united by the shared need to see the sunrise. As anxiety grew, Miller offered support, knowing panic was as dangerous as the flood. "Help is coming," he said. "We just have to hold on." Ace sat alone on the roof of his submerged garage. His world was a ruin, the tools of his trade, all gone. He had always lived by a simple code: look out for number one. He saw a family clinging to an overturned pickup truck. The father was struggling, his strength clearly failing. Ace watched them, his mind a battlefield of conflicting instincts. But the sound of the child's frightened cries cut through his lifetime of self-preservation. With a curse, he made his decision. He spotted a long piece of wooden scaffolding that might work as a raft. "Hey!" he shouted. "Over here! Grab onto this!" Ace was no hero, but he was choosing to help. On the Del Perro freeway, Sarah Jenkins ran a makeshift clinic between stalled trucks. She had nearly 24 patients with injuries from minor to severe. With one medical bag and a few flares, it was a world away from Pillbox Hill. One man with a broken leg was going into shock. She could only do what was possible, fashioning a crude splint and using jackets to fight the cold. Every life she touched was a small victory. She was not just treating injuries, she was nurturing hope. She had taken an oath to preserve life, honoring it under impossible circumstances. "We don't stop," she said, "not until they're all safe." The storm could take the city, but not her oath. The sky was completely black. From the liquor store roof, Officer Miller saw the city as faint lights against an abyss. The burden of leadership weighed heavily on him. He was responsible for these people. He scanned the dark water, straining to see any sign of rescue. The quiet man finally spoke. "You got a plan, officer?" "The plan is to stay alive," Miller said, his voice hard. "We stay together, we stay warm, we stay ready. They'll be doing grid searches. It's slow work, especially in the dark. But they are coming." His words were a shield against the terrifying truth of their isolation. He was a cop, surrounded by people who needed help, and he could do nothing but sit on a roof and wait. The city he had sworn to protect was in its darkest hour. Communication was a casualty of the flood. Official channels were down, but in the darkness a new network began to form, a network of human voices. From balconies, people shouted to each other simple affirmations of existence. "We're still here." On the freeway overpass, Sarah Jenkins and her group could hear these faint voices. Dave, the paramedic, flashed a light towards a nearby building, and a light flashed back. Officer Miller used his whistle, blowing the universal signal for distress. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a node in a network. With shouts, whistles, and flashes of light, the people of Los Santos began to stitch their community back together. Ace struggled in the powerful current, the heavy piece of scaffolding acting more like an anchor than a raft. He finally managed to wedge it against the side of the overturned truck where the family was clinging. "Grab it!" he yelled over the storm. The father, his face a mask of exhaustion and gratitude, reached out and took hold. With immense effort, Ace and the father managed to maneuver the mother and child onto the relative stability of the wooden platform. They were still in the water, still cold, but they were no longer in immediate danger of being swept away. Ace pulled himself up, his muscles burning from the exertion. He looked at the man he had just helped. The father was a simple man, a construction worker by the look of his clothes, his hands calloused and strong. In any other world, their paths would never have crossed. Ace was a creature of the night, of fast cars and illegal dealings. This man was a creature of the day, of hard work and family. The flood had made them neighbors. "Thank you," the father gasped, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us." Ace just grunted in response, uncomfortable with the man's gratitude. He hadn't done it to be a hero. He wasn't even sure why he had done it. Working together, they began to pull their makeshift raft towards a nearby building that looked more secure, one with a fire escape they could climb. It was slow, grueling work. They fought the current for every inch. Ace found himself following the father's instructions, using his strength to push while the father steered with a broken piece of plywood. A criminal wheelman and a construction worker, forming a team. The old rules of the street, of status and occupation, were meaningless here. There were only two kinds of people now, the living and the dead. And the living had to work together. They finally reached the building and helped the mother and her shivering child onto the first landing of the fire escape. The four of them huddled together on the cold, wet metal, a tiny, unlikely family forged in disaster. The father looked at Ace again. "What's your name?" he asked. Ace hesitated. His name was a liability, a connection to a world he needed to keep separate. But out here in the drowned city, it felt like a pointless secret. "Ace," he said. The man nodded. "I'm Marco," he replied, extending a hand. In the middle of the darkness and chaos, two men from different worlds shook hands, their alliance a small but powerful testament to the bonds that can form when all else is washed away. The sound grew steadily, different from the storm. It was a boat, an LSPD patrol boat, lights flashing. Survivors flashed an SOS. The sight of the first rescue boat was powerful. This boat, crewed by two officers, was a beacon of hope. Another boat appeared, a small fishing boat. An ordinary citizen answered the call for help. The city's survival depended on its ordinary people. The first boats were appearing, a thin line of defense. The LSPD boat reached Miller's rooftop. The officers threw a line and Miller secured it. The young tourist couple went first, their movements clumsy with fear. Miller and the tattooed man helped them into the boat. Each transfer was a heart-stopping moment. The water between the roof and the boat was a churning black void. This was a desperate extraction from a combat zone where the enemy was the city itself. They had to get these people off the roof. There were hundreds, maybe thousands more just like them. On the fire escape, Ace and Marco watched another rescue nearby. Miller was the last one to leave the rooftop. He looked at the faces of the people he had helped save. They were all soaked, shivering, and in shock. But they were alive. The scale of the disaster stretched out before them. The rescue boats were not taking survivors to safety. Not yet. There was no safe harbor to go to. Instead, they were ferrying them to designated triage points. These were larger, more stable islands in the flood. Freeway overpasses, multi-story parking garages, and the fortified steps of government buildings. The Del Perro Freeway overpass, where Sarah Jenkins had already established her makeshift clinic, became one of the main triage points for the western part of the city. The LSPD boat carrying Officer Miller and his group was headed there. It was the closest high ground that could accommodate a large number of people and equipment. As Miller's boat approached the overpass, the scene was one of organized chaos. Flares and vehicle headlights cast an eerie, flickering glow over the wet asphalt. A constant stream of boats, police, fire, and civilian, was arriving, dropping off survivors before heading back into the flooded darkness. Paramedics like Sarah and Dave moved quickly between the huddled groups, their voices calm and authoritative as they assessed injuries and prioritized care. It was a battlefield hospital, created on a strip of concrete suspended above a drowned city. The air hummed with a mixture of human misery and the quiet determination of the rescuers. When Miller stepped onto the overpass, he was no longer a survivor. He was a cop again. He immediately reported to the LSFD captain who was coordinating the triage point. While the other people from his roof were guided towards blankets and medical attention, Miller was put to work. His job was to help manage the flow of incoming survivors, to maintain order and prevent panic from taking hold. He found himself directing people, calming frightened families, and helping to carry the injured. The exhaustion was still there, a heavy weight on his shoulders, but the sense of purpose returned, pushing the fatigue away. Sarah Jenkins saw the new arrivals. She quickly assessed the young couple, treating them for hypothermia. She checked on the store clerk, who was miraculously unharmed but deeply in shock. Her eyes met Miller's for a brief moment, a paramedic and a cop, two sides of the same coin, both covered in grime, both running on fumes, both doing their job. The triage point was a critical link in the chain of survival. It was a place to sort the wounded, to offer a moment of respite, and to gather strength before the next stage of the evacuation could begin. It was a small pocket of order, bought at a terrible price. The makeshift rescue fleet was a strange and varied armada. Sleek LSPD patrol boats moved alongside battered fishing trawlers. Fire department Zodiacs shared the water with private speedboats, their powerful engines a stark contrast to the quiet paddling of a few brave souls in kayaks. This fleet was the city's new circulatory system, its arteries and veins pumping survivors from the brink of death to the relative safety of the triage points. Each boat was a vessel of hope for those it rescued. But for every person pulled from the water, there were countless others left behind, their cries for help unanswered. The boat crews faced impossible choices. As they navigated a flooded street, they would see dozens of people waving from windows and rooftops. Who did they rescue first? The family with small children? The elderly couple? The person who looked badly injured? They had limited space and limited time. Every decision was a life or death calculation. The crews, made up of both professional rescuers and civilian volunteers, were forced to become gods of their small, floating worlds, deciding who would be saved now and who would have to keep waiting, praying their building wouldn't collapse before another boat came by. Ace and Marco, still on the fire escape, witnessed this cruel arithmetic firsthand. A civilian boat came down their street, already overloaded with survivors. The people on board looked away, unable to meet the gazes of those they were passing. They couldn't take on anyone else without risking capsizing. Ace understood the logic, but the sight of the boat moving on, leaving them behind, was a blow. Marco's wife held their child tighter, her face a mask of despair. Hope was a fragile thing, and watching it float away was a unique kind of pain. The fleet was a symbol of both salvation and the terrible limits of that salvation. The stories of heroism were matched by stories of heartbreak. A police boat filled with rescued children had its engine stall after sucking in debris. It was left adrift, a precious cargo of lives suddenly in peril again, waiting for another boat to rescue the rescuers. A civilian volunteer, a young man in a small speedboat, worked for hours, pulling dozens of people to safety before his fuel ran out, leaving him stranded among the very people he had been trying to save. The fleet was a microcosm of the city itself, brave, resilient, and overwhelmed, fighting a desperate battle, one small victory and one tragic setback at a time. As Act 4 drew to a close, a new phase of the disaster began. The initial shock and the frantic, chaotic rescues were settling into a long, grim struggle for endurance. The rain had stopped, but the water was not receding. In fact, in some low-lying areas, it was still slowly creeping higher as runoff from the hills continued to pour into the basin. The city was now a static, watery landscape of haves and have-nots, those on dry land at a triage point, and those still trapped, waiting in the cold and darkness. The night was far from over. For thousands, the most dangerous hours were still to come. On the Del Perro overpass, a fragile sense of order prevailed. Sarah Jenkins continued her work, moving from patient to patient, her energy fueled by pure adrenaline. Officer Miller stood guard at the edge of the overpass, his eyes scanning the darkness, his posture a defiant stance against the chaos. They and the other responders were preparing for a long siege. They had to keep the survivors calm, tend to the injured, and conserve their dwindling resources until morning, when a larger, more organized evacuation might be possible. The immediate crisis of the flood's arrival was over. Now, the long, slow crisis of its aftermath began. For those still trapped, the silence was the new enemy. The sounds of the storm had been terrifying, but the relative quiet that followed was worse. It was a silence filled with uncertainty. Was another boat coming? Had they been forgotten? Every distant noise was a potential sign of hope, and every moment of silence that followed was a crushing disappointment. Ace and Marco's small group on the fire escape huddled together for warmth, speaking in low voices, trying to keep their spirits up. They watched the stars begin to appear as the clouds broke, a beautiful and cruel sight in their desperate situation. The city of Los Santos was holding on by a thread. Its fate rested on the shoulders of people like Miller and Jenkins, on the courage of civilian boaters, and on the resilience of those still waiting for rescue. The flood had dealt the city a devastating blow, tearing apart its infrastructure and drowning its streets. But it had not broken its spirit. As the long night deepened, the people of Los Santos, scattered and broken, faced the darkness together. They had survived the storm. Now they had to survive the night. Hope was a flickering candle against a hurricane, but for now it was still burning. The first hint of dawn crept over the mountains, slowly pushing back the darkness. For the first time, the survivors could see the full, horrifying scope of the disaster. The water was revealed as a vast brown lake studded with the ruins of their world. The sunrise painted a picture of utter devastation. On the freeway overpass, the new light revealed weary survivors. An officer watched the sun rise over the drowned city. The light brought only a clearer view of the monumental task ahead. The light meant they were more visible, increasing their chances of rescue. As the sun climbed higher, the water began a slow, steady retreat. The water level dropped, revealing more of the broken city. It was a start. The Great Flood was finally beginning to loosen its grip. Days later, the water receded, leaving behind a thick layer of mud. The streets were littered with destroyed cars. A profound silence hung over the city. This was the scar left by the flood, a deep wound that would take years to heal. Makeshift memorials appeared, marking where people were last seen. Families were broken, homes destroyed. The heroes of the storm returned, changed. Ace returned to his ruined garage, his criminal enterprise washed away. The flood had taken everything, but given him a choice. The old Ace was gone. A new one had to decide what to do next. The rebuilding of Los Santos began not with bulldozers and cranes, but with small acts of community. Neighbors helped neighbors shovel mud from their homes. Strangers shared food and clean water. The lines that had once divided the city, wealth, race, gang affiliation, seemed to blur. In Davis, gang members worked alongside LSPD officers to clear debris from the streets. In Vinewood, wealthy homeowners opened their undamaged mansions to shelter displaced families. The disaster had stripped the city down to its foundations, and in the wreckage, people rediscovered their shared humanity. The spirit of Los Santos was not in its buildings, but in its people. The government and large corporations promised to rebuild, bigger and better. Plans were drawn up for new, more resilient infrastructure, for better flood defenses and warning systems. Billions of dollars were pledged. But the real reconstruction was happening on a much smaller scale. It was happening when a local restaurant fired up a grill to feed an entire block. It was happening when a group of kids organized to clean up their local park. It was happening in the support groups that formed in community centers, where survivors shared their stories and began to heal their psychological wounds together. Months turned into a year. The scars on the city began to fade. New buildings rose from the foundations of the old ones. Grass grew again in the parks. The sounds of traffic and life slowly returned to the streets. The flood became a memory, a defining event in the city's history that people would talk about for generations. It was a story of tragedy and loss, but also one of incredible resilience and heroism. The city had faced its darkest hour and had survived. It was different now, humbled and wiser, forever marked by the day the water came. Los Santos, the city of dreams, had been through a nightmare. But as the sun set on a rebuilt Vinewood Boulevard, casting a warm glow on the new storefronts and the bustling crowds, it was clear that the dream was still alive. It was a more sober, more realistic dream now, one forged in disaster and tempered by loss. The people knew how quickly everything could be taken away, but they also knew that they had the strength to face whatever came next, together. A new day had dawned on Los Santos, not just the first light after the storm, but the beginning of a new chapter for a city that refused to be drowned.